In this episode,
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Buyers can borrow more money for more energy efficient homes.
The heat pump is only one link in the chain.
get somebody MCS because we're here for you.
I would recommend that they go to somebody who might be in a position to help them.
There's one manufacturer who's competition, so I will not name them.
I realise I've gone purple. I don't know why that's happened.
There is an element of buyer beware here.
Hi and welcome to another episode of Homeowners Q&A. I'm your host Mars, and today we're diving into the often overlooked but critical world of heat pump financing and warranties. To help us demystify this topic, I'm joined by Maria Dutton from the Green Finance Institute, Beanland from the Heat Pump Federation, and Neil Sawers from Grant UK. Welcome everybody. Before we begin, a big thank you to Hive for sponsoring this episode. Hive is helping customers unlock the hidden power of their homes with a seamless range of smart, eco-friendly tech. From smart thermostats that can reduce your energy bills, to heat pumps that draw warmth from thin air, solar panels that can turn sunlight into income, and EV chargers that power up while you sleep. All connected, all controlled effortlessly through the Hive app. Right now, heat pumps start from just £1,850 with a government grant, and flexible finance options are available. And with an exclusive heat pump rate of 14p per kilowatt hour, you could bring down your energy bills too. Find out more at hive.com. Eligibility conditions apply. Hive, know your power. Right, Bean. So I guess the most logical place to start would be in terms of looking at the government grants for heat pumps. So we used to have the RHI. We've now got the bus grant. Could you just explain to viewers, for those that actually don't know, what the bus grant is and what the financial incentives are?
So the renewable heat incentive, for those that remember it, was a subsidy rather than a grant. And it was paid out over an extended period of time, 20 years if you were non-domestic, 7 years if you were domestic. That was perceived to be less of an incentive for homeowners because they had to wait an extended period to get their funding back, and was potentially less good for people on with lower incomes. So the new scheme, the replacement, the boiler upgrade scheme, is an out-and-out capital grant. And the intention is that that sum of money is discounted from the invoice value for the project. So the homeowner never has to actually find the money. That's the intent. When it was launched, the value was £5,000 for air source and a little more for ground source, if I recall. That was perceived to be not quite enough. It didn't quite have the pull-through and the impact on the market. And a couple of years ago, the value was increased to £7,500 per eligible project. And that has made a significant difference. That does seem to have been the sort of spot at which it has really started to ignite the market. For many homeowners in an average size home, if you've got a £7,500 grant and you are looking at something in the region of £2,500 to replace a boiler, you've got £10,000 budget, and that goes a pretty long way to doing a large proportion of the UK's housing market.
So, Neil, do you think that the boiler upgrade scheme is enough to actually motivate homeowners to switch from a boiler to a heat pump?
Not on its own. There's no one silver bullet. I think we're fortunate in the UK that we've also got Eco4, we've got Hug, we've got LAD. And so there's other public money available for those who find it hard to pay, for those that are on some form of qualifying benefit. And I think added together, it's making a significant impact into boiler replacement.
So, Maria, we actually just did an episode on, it was a bit of a controversial one in terms of, are heat pumps only for the rich? And when I actually did a survey in the build-up to that episode, I was actually quite interested to find that for a lot of homeowners, their heat pump installations were kind of in the £15,000 to £20,000 mark, minus the £7,500 boiler upgrade scheme voucher that actually went on the back of that, which is quite a lot of money for homeowners to try and basically find in order to switch from a boiler to a heat pump. So what kind of finance options exist for homeowners that are looking to potentially finance their heat pump?
So this is my favorite kind of question because there's a lot to talk about here. The first thing that we would typically talk about at the GFI is around green mortgages, because the green mortgage market has grown a lot over the past couple of years. This can be really appropriate for incentivizing purchases of already energy efficient homes, but it also can mean people can borrow a bit more money if the home is energy efficient, or it can help with the actual budget of the retrofit. And the sums of money involved there can vary a lot. But for the smaller sums of money that you're looking at, I really like what Neil said. There's no one silver bullet as a solution, and that's true of the finance as well. So there's different kinds of solutions that will work for different people. And for some people, unsecured finance might be the right kind of solution, which typically is what's used for sort of lower pools of things like that are like a couple of thousand. That is typically something that you would describe as any kind of borrowing that's not tied to the property. So it's used very commonly for things like kitchens or sofas, so usually small loans of a few £1,000s, and can be much more suitable for smaller sums, so sort of £10,000 mark or less, and is often more flexible or integrated into the buying process of, say, an actual heat pump. So it does tend to have higher interest rates than mortgages, I should say that. But if you're borrowing over a shorter time frame, total cost might actually be lower. So when unsecured finance is used for energy efficiency or low carbon heating, like a heat pump, we'd call it unsecured green home finance. And this is a market that we've seen real growth in over the past couple of years. So at the end of 2022, there were 8 unsecured green home finance products in the market, but now there are 25. So it's over threefold growth in just over 2 years. It can take a couple of different forms, which I can talk about. So things like personal loans, point of sale finance are some examples. The quick answer is that we're seeing a really significant growth in these products over time. I realise I've gone purple. I don't know why that's happened. I might stay purple.
Yeah, I think it's really important to make a distinction. We talk about cost of a heat pump, and you've mentioned the figures of 15 to £18,000. The average cost reported under the renewable heat incentive, under the boiler upgrade scheme, is around 13,400, I believe. But it's really, really important to get across to people that that is not the cost of the heat pump. We see flippantly written in media and what have you, oh, the cost of a heat pump's many, tens of thousands, £10,000. The cost of a boiler is 1,500 quid. That is just irresponsible reporting, because the bulk of the cost of the heat pump transition is the transition, and it's a one-off cost. What we absolutely must not do is set in the minds of consumers the fact that every time they have to replace their heat pump, it's another £12,000, because it absolutely isn't. So we must be very careful in order not to mislead consumers.
Well, of what you had to say, Maria, about the financing, that's really interesting because I didn't know any of that existed. We don't see it from the consumer's point of view. We only see it from product.
That is interesting. Back in the day, there in sort of 2018 time, there were around 4 green mortgages on the market, but now today there are over 60. So nearly every major lender does have something, but it's not just the number of products that's increased from a green mortgage angle, it's also the type of product. So the first wave that we were seeing 2018, 2019, was all about incentives, so discounted mortgage rates offered as a reward, usually for buying the more energy efficient home in the first place. So this is what most people think of when they think about a green mortgage. And a similar version of this is additional borrowing for making a home more energy efficient after purchasing. So lenders like Nationwide or Coventry Building Society both offer these kinds of products. So this is where if you're already a customer with them, you can borrow a bit more at a slightly better rate, usually. And that extra bit can be used to improve the energy efficiency of a home. It could be used to install a heat pump. So that means that you can do sort of the whole lot of work all in one go. But the other thing that we've seen recently that is really interesting is the rise of something that we are calling enhanced affordability. It's not necessarily a great customer focused name, but that's broadly what it's called. And it basically means that buyers can borrow more money for more energy efficient homes. So one that we supported is through the Octopus Zero Bills proposition. And that essentially means that you have a property with guaranteed zero energy bills. And that means that the buyer can afford slightly higher monthly mortgage payments. So with our support, we did some work with some lenders, and some lenders now offer higher loan to income ratios for properties like that. So a borrower on £30,000 might be able to borrow, say, 180 instead of 120, which is a sort of 60k difference just by virtue of the home's performance. So you can borrow up to around, say, 6 times your income rather than 4 times your income. And we've seen this from lenders like Lloyd's, Halifax, Leeds Building Society, and Perenna, are all examples, but not the exhaustive list of lenders who are factoring that in.
What's driving them to do that? To think of government money, for, if it was, let's say, Eco4, then it's the energy companies through Ofgem and their eco obligation to make the arrangement for those who can't afford to pay to still access renewable heat. What's in it for the financial end?
That's another great question. Partly it's lenders have their own targets, they have their own climate targets that they need to meet, but partly it's the size of the opportunity. So we know that decarbonising homes is a really important milestone to reach net zero. We know that we can't reach net zero without decarbonising homes. We know that it's about 20% of the UK's carbon emissions, but also there's policy angles to it too. So there's a real focus from the current government at the moment in the manifesto. They commit to upgrading 5 million homes, lower energy bills, and to deliver that, they reference the Warm Homes Plan in the manifesto, which talks about offering a mix of grants and low interest loans to help households invest in energy efficient upgrades and working with the private sector. So there's an opportunity there. We know that resiliency of homes is going to become more and more important as we see more of the effects of climate change. So it's an opportunity to make sure that the homes on their books are more resilient, essentially.
We've got problems with Bean connecting to us. We'll forge ahead and hopefully he'll reconnect with us. So Maria, you mentioned green mortgages pretty much at the outset of this episode. Do those green mortgages only apply to heat pumps, or is it also a matter of if you wanted to get like PV or battery storage or anything that kind of electrifies you further, can that all be brought into the same loan?
Yeah, it definitely can be. It depends on what provider you're looking at. So different providers will say different things. As a general rule, what you can use to get your mortgage financing for is anything that supports energy efficiencies is definitely worth looking at. But some lenders will also help you navigate a bit of the journey as well. Lenders like Skipton, for example, offer integrated processes into the mortgage journey. So if you are a Skipton customer, you can sort of visit their website, you can get an EPC through them and advice on what you might need to do next. And part of that is helping you understand sort of what your path is to a heat pump, what your path is to a decarbonised home, and what your path is to a more energy efficient property. And then you can sort of follow those steps and look at different ways that you can take out money. The best way, I should say, actually, also, if any listeners are or either of you are interested in trying to navigate the world of green mortgages, is the best place to start is with a mortgage broker. So it's their role essentially to know all of this so that you don't have to. We learn it because we're enthusiasts, but the brokers can help you navigate what this world looks like, but also existing mortgage lenders. So if you already have a relationship with a mortgage lender, they're a pretty good point of call and will almost definitely have something.
A question we actually received from one of our followers is that they've had their heat pump finance as part of their mortgage, and they're asking what happens if they want to move in a few years' time and they want to actually take that heat pump with them. Does that heat pump have to stay on the property, or are they obliged to, or can they take it with them?
They might be able to take it with them. I suppose they could take it out and sell the property without a heating system, but that possibly could be challenging. What you raise is a really interesting point that people are concerned about sort of, if I make this installation now, I'm not sure what's going to happen to the value of my house price. I want to pay for it for as long as I live in it. What happens there? And in the US, they have this really interesting model called PACE, which is where the finance for particular products stays with the property. So this essentially means that the cost of the installation is tied to the property rather than to the individual. So repayments to that, say installation, say a heat pump, are also connected to the property. And then if the homeowner moves, the repayments stay with the home and go to the next owner. So the next owner picks that up. And one of the reasons it's such an appealing idea is it recognizes that energy upgrades benefit the home itself, not just the current occupant. We, the GFI, have been leading development of this in the UK. We're calling it property linked finance because that's what it does. It links finance to the property, but it still needs the right legislation to be deployed at scale in the UK. So we haven't seen any models like it yet. So maybe your listener would be interested in following developments of PLF in the UK.
Welcome back, Bean.
Are you thinking about getting a heat pump? Then don't get caught out by a bad installation. Bodge Buster is your essential guide to asking the right questions and spotting red flags before it's too late. Written from real homeowner experience, this book gives you the knowledge to avoid costly mistakes and make informed decisions. Get Bodge Buster today in print or for Kindle, link in the description. Neil, one of the things that I actually wanted to cover in this podcast was also the warranty. So, citing that case that I just posed to Maria in terms of people moving properties and actually wanting to take the heat pump with them, what then happens to the warranty aspect of that heat pump? So, maybe the heat pump's only 1 or 2 years old. They've decided to move house. They already love that heat pump. They've already paid for it. What happens to the warranty aspect of that?
So as far as Grant's concerned, the warranty carries on with the new ownership, and irrespective of how many times the house is sold on, for as long as there's warranty remaining, that will transfer with the property. Don't think that anyone should be penalised just because the warranty was originally assigned to one person. It's the heat pump that has it, not the person. There shouldn't be any issues with that at all.
How long do your warranties typically last?
Well, typically it depends. So if it's a Joe Bloggs walking in off the street and buying one from the merchant, then he would get 1 year warranty. If he registers it with us, he gets 2 years. If the installer is trained by us and it's not an arduous course, but becomes part of the G1 scheme, he would get 5 years. Sometimes he'd get a 7 year warranty. I'm hoping to be able to make noises soon that we would be increasing that. We're constrained by component manufacturers who only offer smaller warranties. So we have to have confidence in product, as every manufacturer would, that if we start offering longer and longer warranties, that we're not going to be left with a big bill at the end.
So, Bean, we kicked this episode off talking about the boiler upgrade scheme. If you were to look into your crystal ball, how do you think that the government grant might evolve in the years to come?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Technically, the boiler upgrade scheme is currently scheduled to run until the end of March 2028. We are waiting, obviously, for the spending review to see whether or not current spending is not under threat. So that's the first thing. There is likely to be a consultation on the boiler upgrade scheme published sometime in the next couple of months, hopefully. That will have a number of elements in it, we believe, including things like extensions to scope. I think it's highly unlikely it will increase any of the values, but it is likely that it will ask questions about extending the scope to other technologies, which could include heat batteries, possibly even air-to-air heat pumps, which most people would typically refer to as air conditioning. And we'd be back to differential values within the scheme rather than a flat rate, because air-to-air technology tends to be lower cost to install.
Are warranties pretty standard from one manufacturer to another?
Funnily enough, I did an exercise about a couple of months ago, and I pulled off the top 20, what I would call top 20 manufacturers in the UK. They're all about the same. There's not really an awful lot to split them. Starting at 2, working up to 5, maybe 7. I know there's one manufacturer who's competition, so I will not name them, but under specific rules, which is part of the Eco4 funding, you could get a 12-year warranty, which is fairly hefty. But with that comes some conditions, which is the same as a manufacturer's warranty anyway. They have to be annually serviced. You can't have them significantly undersized for the property, so it's running like the clappers all the time. So there are conditions that you would be required to meet to get these longer warranties.
So, Bean, Neil mentioned different manufacturers have different warranties. Do you think that if there is a manufacturer that offers a better warranty than somebody else, that you might potentially get a better loan deal on something that's got more life in it?
I'd be pretty surprised, to be honest, because I would be highly surprised if the lender even asked what brand the heat pump is. I'm not sure that they would want to go into that level of detail. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Maria will correct me, but I'd be very surprised. Well, it's interesting, Neil, isn't it? Because during the domestic renewable heat incentive, most of the manufacturers had 7-year warranties to match the term of the RHI. And that's obviously shifted quite a bit. Yeah, warranties are really important. But actually, if I put myself in the sort of shoes of a homeowner, the quality of the installer is significantly more important than the length of the warranty. Critically for the installer, having really, really robust in-country technical support is, again, probably more important than an extra year of warranty. I wouldn't personally get hung up on the length of warranties. Clearly, you want to get a decent length warranty, get that. But I wouldn't be hung up on it as something that makes or breaks a purchase.
The heat pump is only one link in the chain. It's part of the complete system. For the consumer's protection, from the consumer's point of view, It's great having a 2, 5, 7, 12-year warranty in the heat pump, but what about the rest of the system? What about the maintenance? What about the, after it's installed, how much warranty is there for them? How much protection is there for them?
But that won't be factored into the loan, surely then.
So I think it might be good if I talk a bit about what a lender's typical process could look like. And I will caveat this by saying that this varies significantly across both different types of lenders and different types of finance. Because, say, for a mortgage process, what you might get is a lender saying, we'll offer you additional borrowing to support your energy efficiency goals, to support your heat pump goals. And we'll do so at a slightly lower rate. But then it can be a bit up to the homeowner about what path they go down, who they hire to do the install, what kind of brand. And this can look like MCS registered or MCS certified tends to be the standard that lenders would expect. But the sort of flip side alternative to this is you do have some lending processes. And again, it depends on the type of lender, type of product, and it can vary even within the same type of lender and same type of product. Is that you can have lenders who have specific partnerships. So these lenders will say, we will work with this particular installer of this particular brand, even, and this is what we will lend against. And there's lots of reasons for why it can end up being a bit more prescriptive. And partly that can be to help customers because there can be a lot of information out there, and it can be to help narrow it down a little bit more, but it can be for other reasons too. So it's a sort of fairly complicated landscape that's worth flagging that lenders have different processes.
Yeah, the one other thing I forgot to mention when I was gazing into my crystal ball, which does potentially have some influence on the lending, is that one of the questions might revolve around third-party ownership. So whether or not the boiler upgrade scheme would be available, because at the moment it's only available to the homeowner. So there's this question about whether it should be made available third-party ownership. We've already got some companies which are providing 100% funding. It's not interest-free yet, but there are options, and they are, as Maria said, those lenders are tending to pick the installers that they work with very particularly, so that they've got a good feel of the quality that they're working with.
Neil, obviously it's the boiler upgrade scheme, so you've got to upgrade your boiler to a heat pump in order to avail of that scheme. But we are seeing a lot of people that have had botched heat pump systems kind of put in 5-6 years ago, where that they've availed of either the RHI, whatever scheme was around at the time. The money just doesn't; it's just not there for them to have to kind of redo those systems. So they're still looking at maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 grand to try and fix what has been put in poorly. Do you think that kind of government grants should start accommodating some of those fixes, even though they've already paid out for the initial batch?
I can only speak on behalf of Grant. If someone had a Grant heat pump purchased, installed 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, where we weren't involved in the design, we weren't involved in the installation of the commissioning, probably we wouldn't have it on our system. It wouldn't be flagging up to us as being a potentially problemed install. One of the questions you could go on from that is, what if the installer suddenly went bust and wasn't prepared to maintain it anymore? It's all kind of linked together. All I can see from Grant's point of view is we would always try and help the customer. If it's not working, there's a reason it's not working. It's unlikely to be the heat pump. It's more likely to be the design. It's more likely to be the installation. It's more likely to be the size of product that was purchased in the first place. So we would always try and work with the customer to understand what was going on in the system, what was going on in the design, if any material was available, design drawings, plans, schematic. I can't say that's true of everyone. I can't say that's true of every installer either. Would they actually follow up on their own work 7 years down the line? Maybe not.
If somebody is in that boat, Bean, what would you recommend to them?
I would recommend that they go to somebody who might be in a position to help them, which isn't usually Facebook. I understand people's frustration, and you and I have had this discussion previously, Mars. And people take to social media, but actually, they'd probably be better off contacting us or one of the other trade bodies, because we will always do what we can. It doesn't mean we'll necessarily always be able to solve the problem. There have been times where we have ourselves negotiated preferential terms around lines of redress. I mean, to go back to your original question, should people be able to double dip into the public purse? I think basically no, because they're actually well formulated rules from Treasury and what have you about double dipping. But I understand what you're saying. There are a couple of aspects that I think that might make a difference. Our advice to homeowners is to only contract with installers that carry professional indemnity insurance. That's not a mandated requirement, but our advice strongly says ask them for PI and get to see the certificates and make sure they're in date. PI will run on beyond, if the installer's gone bust, PI will tend to run on. So that's the first thing. And it covers them against things other than workmanship. It covers the design. Under the MCS scheme, there is a requirement for the installer to provide a handover pack. There are some elements that are mandated in the handover pack. Nothing like enough, in my view. And one of the things that isn't mandated yet are a full set of drawings. And we are currently working within Working Group 6 at MCS to increase the robustness of the list of what goes into the handover pack. This is important because if your installer's gone bust and you have got somebody else coming in, or as we are going to see, an increasing number of specialist service companies who don't do installations at all, they just do service and maintenance, it's much, much easier for them to pick a scheme up if they've got a full set of drawings. So those sorts of things, I think, are going to start to improve the ongoing customer journey beyond the initial purchase, so that service and maintenance becomes easier. For me, I mean, I would like lenders to say, great, we want to be able to see all this stuff, or at least know it's available. Now, that's not to put more pain and grief on the installer, because frankly, they should have this already. Particularly those installers who are using subcontract models. I mean, how does a subcontractor do a parcel of work on a client site if there's no drawings to go by? So I think those are critical elements.
Are you new to heat pumps and feeding lost? Then From Zero to Heat Pump Hero helps you understand, operate, and optimize your system. No jargon, just simple practical advice from one homeowner to another. Take control of your heating and save energy. Get your copy now. Link in the description. So Maria, for somebody that's actually watching this, that's trying to figure out how to actually get their heat pump funded, can they combine multiple funding sources for their actual installation?
What somebody could do if they wanted to is to fund part of it through things like grants or their own savings, etc. And then what they could potentially do is explore with either their mortgage lender, their mortgage broker, or look at other forms of unsecured finance to help make up the difference. One form is somebody might go to their bank or lender and take out a personal loan to pay for their improvement. So in this case, a heat pump. And in this situation, they would receive the funds directly and then can spend them however they choose. So to mix up funding, say a bit grant, a bit savings, a bit personal loan, the lender wouldn't necessarily know what the money is being used for unless they have particular processes in place and the borrower says, this is what I've used it for, this is a receipt, and this is how I'm proving it, and things like that. So it's totally up to the borrower ultimately what they use it for. Where those funds do exist like that, they wouldn't necessarily probably be tagged as green. So that can vary, but ordinarily, typically, you'd say that those probably wouldn't be tagged as green. And that can mean that you wouldn't necessarily be able to benefit from particular benefits that come with different kinds of green versions of particular products. That isn't always the case, but typically it might be more likely to be the case. So what you could get ordinarily is, if you're going down a green unsecured route, is that where the finance is clearly linked to a low carbon upgrade, like a heat pump, is you might be able to benefit from a lower interest rate or cashback compared to a standard version of the same product from the same lender. It's definitely worth having the conversation with the lender that you're borrowing it from, because if you're borrowing only part funding, what you might want to do is to be able to say this is part funding. If they have an unsecured personal loan that they would use to support green home improvements, then it might be that they have limits on that, and that might be sort of something that lender would be able to accommodate. But another common structure for unsecured funding is point of sale finance. So this is where it becomes a lot trickier to combine different sources of funding. The grant, or particularly the boiler upgrade scheme grant, would likely be applied to this too, but this is where the finance is more directly tied to the product or the service being purchased. So rather than receiving the cash in their bank account, the customer just gets the heat pump installs and then repays the costs in installments over time. So this is how we see a lot of things like kitchens or sofas being installed. So it's a really common way of financing things like that. What you wouldn't necessarily do is say go to DFS, pay some of it in cash, and then pay the rest on finance. You might do that in some instances, but typically that isn't quite so common.
Just going back to warranties for a second, Neil, we actually did have a question from another homeowner that asked, what are the things that typically aren't covered under a warranty claim that homeowners could potentially be aware of when it comes to heat pumps?
On the heat pump itself, if it's being serviced annually, it's been well maintained, then there's very little that wouldn't be covered. Again, the terms and conditions of the warranty would dictate over periods of time. Once you get past 2 years, are all the parts covered, or is it just labour? Is it just the labour that's covered and not the parts? So there would be T's and C's in all the small print. Pleased to see Grant offers the labour and the parts right through the life of the warranty, provided it's been annually serviced. And it's the other things that go along with it, because normally when you install a heat pump and you're taking out, let's say, a gas combi, you'd have to put in a new cylinder. So the cylinder also needs a service. Now, while not having the cylinder service wouldn't impact on the heat pump warranty, you could see from the consumer's point of view, it's better if they were getting a service package that it would do all of these things at the one time. Almost certainly for a heat pump warranty, we would not cover radiators, internal pipework, anything that wasn't supplied with the heat pump to be installed with the heat pump wouldn't be covered. But that should be covered by the installer for at least the first couple of years.
Bean, we've had a number of installers that have actually come on the show, and we've often asked them advice in terms of how homeowners can better protect themselves against certain types of poor installations. A lot of them cite actually putting a portion of that payment on their credit card. What other financial protections exist that homeowners can avail of in case an installation does go wrong?
My understanding of credit card legislation is that if you put 1 penny on the credit card, the credit card provider is picking up the whole financial risk. And that's a problem, which is why a lot of credit card operators don't like that sort of issue. And I think that may need some tackling at some point in the future. You buy a sofa, you put the whole thing on a credit card, that's fine. But a bit different in this instance. There is an element of buyer beware here. We do have to be a little bit careful, and this might be a bit unpopular. We certify and we put certificates on the device, we put certification on the installer, we have membership of this and membership of that. It doesn't get away from the element of buyer beware and the consumer needing to do a little bit of work and a little bit of due diligence to make sure that they're not falling into the hands of an installer who is either not equipped to do the work in the first place or doesn't have the consumer's best interest at heart. It's one of the reasons why the only document we publish that's consumer facing from the Federation's perspective is what we call a procurement guide. Now, it doesn't teach the homeowner how to install the heat pump themselves, but what it should do is provide them with the lines of questioning to ask of an installer who's standing in front asking for their business, so that they can, first of all, tease out the parameters of the design. What internal temperature are you trying to get to? What level of external temperature we need to protect to? So many homeowners will know that they're in a frost pocket, for example. If you're installing a heat pump close to RAF Benson, you will technically, according to the sort of written word, be closest to London, where the design external temperature might be minus 1.8. But we know that RF Benson is frequently the coldest place in England. A bit of local information would be useful for the installer if they themselves aren't local. But it is important to do some due diligence and make sure you choose an installer, because if you're asking some semi-technical questions, you don't need to know the answer in order to know whether the person standing in front of you is answering either truthfully or honestly or from a knowledge base. You can tell if people are trying to pull the wool. And this is not just about buying heat pumps. This applies to absolutely anything in life.
Maria, I often ask installers that come on this show in terms of international models that they look to in terms of, how to improve the quality of installations in the UK. From a investment perspective, are there any kind of international European models or, further abroad that you think that the UK should potentially avail of or could look into?
There absolutely are, is the short answer. We've seen some amazing models and some relatively famous in this world models in countries like Germany with the KfW Bank. France has a really well set up system, but we don't even need to look that far to see something that has been set up very thoughtfully. So in Ireland, the Home Energy Upgrade Loan Scheme was launched last year. And this is something that has come or been developed through the benefit of a couple of different guarantees as part of the Irish government's national retrofit plan. And what they've done here is work with banks and credit unions to launch low interest loans. So that's a loan that is just lower than the market rate would be, that specifically support upgrades to homes. And this can be used for things like heat pumps, it can be used for things like insulation, but broadly it's used across the energy efficiency spectrum, and it was done as part of the National Retrofit Programme. The way that they've done this and the way that they've set it up to work with banks and building societies is really interesting, because it's one that's sort of been done relatively recently. The KfW is an amazing model, but it was first set up in 1948, so it has a much longer history, where we don't necessarily have a direct equivalent that we could immediately lift and drop and apply to something else. So the Irish model is particularly interesting for that reason as well.
And is it likely that any of those models will make their way to the UK in the kind of the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
We certainly hope so. So what we do at the GFI is work with people across and organisations across industry, so financial institutions, corporates, policymakers, academics, civil society, etc., to accelerate investment into net zero and co-develop and launch solutions and products. So we are actively working to try and bring them to the UK.
I think it's worthwhile covering the workmanship warranty. If the installer goes bust, does the workmanship warranty kick in? And if that is the case, and I'm going to be quite outspoken here, why there's so many complaints are going back to the certification bodies, because the workmanship warranty is not picking up the tab for installers that have since gone pop.
You're not being controversial at all, Neil, because I think it's universally recognised that the existing workmanship warranty, that is a mandated requirement, isn't fit for purpose. I think I'm probably not wrong in saying that there has never been a payout under the scheme. So clearly it's a problem. You will be pleased to hear that under MCS 2.0, the requirement for the workmanship warranty is gone. In terms of enhancing protections, I am looking forward to the launch of MCS 2.0 because I think it will make a big difference. Right up front, it will ease the consumer journey, because as things stand at the moment, if a consumer has a problem, first of all, they've got to decide whether it's a technical problem or a contractual problem. And it could be a bit of both, of course. If it's technical, they have to go to the certification body. Well, who's the certification body? It should be on the paperwork of the contracting installer. It'll be on their website, hopefully. It's listed definitely under MCS, but how does the consumer know to look for that? If it's a contractual problem, it's a code issue. Well, what's the code? How do the consumers know what a code is? So the system, as it was originally conceived, is designed to confuse and obfuscate, as far as I can make out. And all that is being swept away under MCS 2.0.
Even the requirement to be a member of REC, as far as the installer is concerned, to get MCS.
All that's going in-house. So the whole route for the consumer in terms of redress, I've got a problem. It's very simple. It will be contact MCS. They'll pick it up. They're building a team themselves internally, a technical team, to be able to do all this, because it's pretty clear that the current system doesn't work. It's confusing for consumers. And I know this. I've helped a lot of consumers through this mire. And so this I am really looking forward to. I see and hear people throwing bricks at MCS a lot. A lot of that angst is born of the fact that people don't understand exactly what MCS is currently set up to do and whose responsibility the redress currently is, because it is not MCS at the moment. It is the CBs and the codes. It will be MCS, but currently it's the CBs and the codes. And equally, and this came up in front of the select committee recently, there's confusion over what's the difference between Trustmark and MCS. They are completely distinct. Even the MPs on the select committee didn't know what the difference was. But we've got to remember what was inherited when MCS was novated away from government. The inheritance wasn't great, and it came with a lot of legal agreements, which took a long time to unravel and then renegotiate, because the CBs are still going to have a role, because that's what they do. They certify the installers. My hope is that we're now in the final straits. MCS 2.0 has itself now been cleared by the overseeing body. We're just waiting for the CBs to go through the same process, and then we'll be able to get on with it. And I am very hopeful that will start to improve things considerably. Clearly, it won't be perfect, because nothing's perfect, but it will make a big difference. And I think if we can couple that with improving the way we educate, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, if we can educate consumers so that they demand better, because heating for years, decades, consumers have sort of accepted mediocrity. And we need to get them to want to invest a bit more, probably, but demand that they get more from it.
Just to address your point there, Bean. So I think, you mentioned that the MCS were falsely perceived by consumers as being this kind of force that, people could lean on. And they did, I think, to some degree, position themselves as such, because when we put our heat pump in 6 years ago, they were very much, get an MCS accredited installer, because if something goes wrong, MCS is there to bail you out. And that was just simply not the case. I'm really heartened to hear that MCS2.0 is going to try and address some of that.
I'm not sure that MCS itself would ever have said MCS will bail you out.
Well, they have got a complaints portion on their website saying how to complain about it. They have got that whole procedure there. And the perception from a consumer's perspective, correctly or wrongly, always came across as them being, get somebody MCS because we're here for you.
That I absolutely accept.
The consumer, once the complaint was in with MCS, they would immediately either bang it back to the manufacturer, or to the installer, or to the CV. We'll see what the new improved version looks like.
You're absolutely right. I think the issue was that the visibility that people saw, the consumers saw, was an MCS certificate. They didn't see a CB certificate or a code certificate. They saw an MCS certificate. And so you're absolutely right. People assumed that was the route. So that I completely accept, Bars. I think you're spot on there. And I would have liked to have seen a requirement that says, here's your quotation and your contract to sign, and here's the piece of paper that sets out who our certification body is, who our code is, where the links to their complaints processes are, and what you do if you've got a problem. That single piece of paper would have been enormously valuable and would have, I think, probably short-circuited some of the problems which you have seen yourself through the pages of your own website and your own contact with consumers, because I think you're absolutely right. Confusion has been the root of a lot of the angst that we've seen in the last few years.
If you've got any questions about heat pumps, then you need to join the Renewable Heating Hub forums. You can connect with other homeowners, share experiences, and get advice on heat pumps and renewables. Sign up today and be a part of the conversation. Link in the description. So that wraps up our deep dive into the financial and protective aspects of heat pump ownership. A massive thank you to our expert panel, Maria, Neil, and Bean, for sharing their insights. And a big thank you once again to our sponsor, Hive, for making this episode possible. If you found this discussion helpful, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone considering a heat pump. Until next time, stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye.
I think you got problems here, Mars.
I don't know what's going on today.
How much editing will you do in this?
Yeah, a lot.
This is very unnerving. Having a purple face.
Maybe he's on dial-up.
Yeah, probably.
It makes that stupid noise before it starts.
Ba-boing, ba-boing. God, this is a comical episode. There you go. Well done, Maria. You're back in colour.
Yay.
For how long? Quick, ask a question.
I know.
And I've now completely forgotten the second thing I was going to say. Which is now just comes flashing back to me. This is old age. I heard Neil say I was getting old right at the up front.
The longer answer can be a bit more long-winded. I've gone purple again.
Mars, you're going to have to do a lot of editing on this one.
Today it's just been a horror story.
We'll appear in the outtakes, Neil.
There's going to be a lot of outtakes in this episode, that's for sure.
We'll have Bean disappearing for half an hour at a time and Maria going purple.
Your internet were working earlier, Bean. You'd have seen you purple for a really long time. It's a big question. Excuse me. I got too excited to answer that.